So hi everyone, really pleased to be here. I'm interviewing Mike Belsito today. So Mike, why don't you give us a bit of background about your book and your book launch, which was spectacular.
Sure. Well, thanks so much for having me, first of all. And my name's Mike, and I wrote this book called Startup Seed Funding for the Rest of Us, which launched about 2 months ago now at this point. And the process was really cool because this is the first time that I ever wrote a book. It was something that I've always thought about, but I've launched several products before, but I just have never written and launched a book. So for me, I went about the process really thinking about it like a product. I mean, even from the very beginning as I was writing, I was already starting to think about how am I actually going to get the word out? How am I going to actually launch this? All in all, what ended up happening is I wrote this book, which was really for somebody like me 5 years ago, where I'm a startup entrepreneur. I've raised some startup seed capital in the past. I have a lot of friends that have raised seed capital as well. But before I started that process, I had no idea what to do. So this book is really meant for people that are in that specific situation. Fast forwarding all the way to the end, the launch was pretty successful, even though it was completely on my own. Meaning, I'm independent author, don't work with a publisher. The book ended up making it to the top of Product Hunt, was featured by Inc. magazine. It was on Huffington Post. So it's been really, really cool experience.
No, that's fantastic. And it reached the top of Amazon as well, right? In your category.
Yeah. It's one of the top startup books on Amazon right now. At one point, it ended up ascending to the #1 startup book on Amazon, which is cool. It's tapered off a little bit, so we'll see what we can do to get it back to the top.
Yeah, that's already quite impressive because there are lots of books on startups on Amazon, and some of them are like written by pretty influential authors. So well done there.
Thank you.
But I think it's not all about the launch. It's about how you approached the whole idea of writing this this nonfiction book, and how you did it through the process. Because obviously you can't like have a successful launch if you haven't prepared it before, and maybe have a street team, or so how did you do it before the launch to do this successful launch?
Yeah, there are a few things I did that I think ultimately really helped me. One of them was opening up the process to anybody that wanted to be a part of the process. I did this early on because, writing this was awesome and fun and in many ways cathartic coming off of my last startup. But it was also a lonely experience too, in that, I'm writing the book, but it's just, I'm doing it by myself. And I didn't have an editor at first. Later on, I did bring an editor on board. So there was nobody to really get feedback from throughout. So what I did was I opened it up and I created what I called an insider group. And anybody that wanted essentially to have an inside view of the process. So they could literally have access to the Word file that I was using to write the book. Whenever I had questions, I would bounce it off of this group. So I created this group. I created a way for people to join the group. And that was super helpful because what it did was it allowed me to get feedback throughout. I mean, just like having a beta group for a product that you're building where you get that critical feedback that you need before launching the product, I was doing the same for the book. And this was a group of people that, would tell me, hey, Mike, I don't think you have enough personality in chapter 4, or, chapter 6 is just, something's missing there. I think you should take another stab at it. So that was really awesome. But the other good piece about that was when the time came to actually get the book out there, right? Launch it, spread the word. This was a group of committed people that was happy to spread the word too. So that was one of the things that I did that was really helpful. I'd say the other thing was, I started a blog, and the funny thing was I told myself that I wasn't going to start a blog because I'm writing this book. Like, now, how am I supposed to build an audience for my book and build an audience for my blog? Like, that's now it's like doubly as hard. What I realized is it's really one and the same. And having a blog is a way that I could actually get people to become familiar with some of my writing, get them excited about what it is that I was writing. So I started outside of the Valley and sat outsideofthevalley.com just as a blog. And that's actually what attracted a lot of the people for that insider group. What also helped me with that blog was I ended up getting picked up by different curated lists for startup articles. So Startup Digest, Founder Weekly, groups like that. And that really helped me broaden my reach outside of my hometown of Cleveland, Ohio, here in the United States to, all over the country and all over the world. I had people, I think one of the things, like backing up about that insider list, when I created it, I half thought, well, maybe my friends and family are going to sign up and that's okay. But 99% of the people on that list are people I've never even met before from all over the world. But what helped me make that happen was actually getting some of those blog articles shared in some of those publications.
Of course. So I think, so the way you built your email list pre-launch was mainly through the blog, you think?
I would say it was, yeah, absolutely. Mainly through the blog and mostly because articles that I shared on the blog got shared in other publications.
Did you also capture the email addresses of the people who contributed to your Word document?
Yeah, so I was keeping two separate lists. I was keeping my insider group list, and then I was keeping a list of people that was just interested in the book when it came out. Because I realized also, like, not everybody wants to be involved in that process. Like, that just might either, like, look, I just want to see the finished product. Don't let it, don't let the early stuff taint my view of what the finished product will look like. There's plenty of people like that. And I knew that there would be, because in the product world, that's the exact same thing. There's a difference between early evangelists, early adopters, and late adopters. The people that, look, just give me the product when it's ready. I don't want to see it when it has the bugs and the kinks. So I knew that would be the case. So yeah, I kept these two separate lists really to differentiate the two. Ultimately, it's sort of one and the same. But if I write another book now, I'll absolutely be going back to that insider group to see, hey, do you want to sign up for the same experience?
Of course. No, it makes sense. Do you reckon this works very well in nonfiction, because you have your blog, you can write about the stuff you're ultimately going to write also about on your book, and also opening up the writing process? Do you think it works better in nonfiction than fiction, or how could a fiction author do that?
Yeah, it's interesting because I have never considered, I'd never written a book before, right? So now that I've written a book, like some people refer to me as an author, which is just really weird because, I never thought of, I even now still don't necessarily think of myself like that, but I've had the chance to meet other authors now, and other authors that have written nonfiction and fiction. And there's this fiction author that, because this exact conversation I was having with somebody else, and they were saying, oh, well, that process could work really well for nonfiction, but what about fiction? Yep. But this fiction author I met, she writes paranormal novels, which is really cool. So basically ghost stories, right? And totally fictional ghost stories, but she writes them. Well, she has the same sort of process, and it works for her because people are generally interested, for people that are just generally interested in the paranormal and ghost stories and things like that, they're attracted to that part of that process too. Now, it takes a certain type of person to be attracted to it, but she has a very similar process, and she used a very similar process as me to launch her book too, which is to really, network and build a relationship with, what I would call influencers as well. So I think maybe it works particularly well for nonfiction authors, but I know for sure that it can work for fiction as well.
No, that's fantastic to know. And I think that's also what websites like Wattpad are all about, right? Be able to connect with some kind of beta readers and receive feedback. The only thing that Wattpad doesn't really allow you afterwards to leverage these beta users for your launch, unless you do it cleverly.
Right.
You mentioned influencers, and I think they're very important both in nonfiction and fiction. So how do you get these influencers to tweet about you, or even to read your book or be interested in your process?
Yeah. So just as a kind of a background for me, I mentioned before I had a startup company. Company was called eFuneral, and we raised some startup capital. So I had some loose connections to investors, venture capitalists, angel investors, but very few would be considered like household names, so to speak, right? However, what I did was, as I was starting to write this book, just like I had this group of beta users, I sort of force created another beta group of influencers. So these people, whether they wanted to be on my influencer list or not, they were, but I didn't treat it like a list. I didn't like send out mass email. I just sent personalized email to these folks every now and then asking for feedback. So I let them know, hey, I'm writing this book. It's on a topic that I'm really passionate about because of my background, and I'd love your feedback. And I realized that some of these people, and by the way, so these are people that would be like, again, well-known household names, venture capitalists, entrepreneurs, people in that realm, because that's the type of book that I was writing. That was really these are the influencers for my audience, right? And throughout, some of these people actually did respond and were supportive. And, some would say, hey, look, I don't have a whole lot of time to read it now, but let me know when it's out and I'll help spread the word. Or would offer me just kind of general encouragement. And believe me, a lot of others would just like not even respond as well. But my hope was by the time that that the book actually came out, that some of them might be able to spread the word. And this is no different than when I was raising capital and talking to angel investors and venture capitalists. What I know is that investors don't like to invest in companies that they've just heard about for the first time ever. Some do, but it's pretty rare, right? Like usually they like to see progress, and they like to meet somebody early on and see, wow, this person's really gone above and beyond these last few months. He's really progressed. So that's how I was trying to treat it with the book. And sure enough, by the time that the book actually came out, first of all, I sent a draft copy. So pretty much a final draft, but I sent a draft copy to every one of those influencers about 3 or 4 weeks before the book was ready to launch to the public. And then when the book was live on Amazon, I sent an email back to each one of those people and said, hey, don't know if you've had a chance to read it. Hopefully you have, but if so, 2 things. I would love a review if you were so compelled to leave a review, but I'd also love if you could help spread the word. And I made it really easy for them to do that. I used click to tweet to just create a simple link that they could click, and their tweet would be just like totally populated for them. And sure enough, on the morning of my launch, there were 3 or 4 major influencers that either tweeted, they used that click to tweet link, or they retweeted one of my posts into their feed. And these were people like Brad Feld, Mark Suster, Steve Case, former chairman of AOL, people like that on that first day, it absolutely helped me move the needle. And it's interesting because Brad Feld's tweet in particular, I was able to track all the way back to his tweet being responsible for essentially getting me to the top of Product Hunt, or at least getting me on Product Hunt and letting people see it. And then later on, I received a ton of upvotes, and it ended the day in the top 3 on Product Hunt. At one point, it was actually number 1. But I was able to track it back all the way to Brad Feld, the person that posted it on Product Hunt, originally found out about the book from that very tweet. So it was really, really helpful.
No, that's amazing. And I think the Product Hunt example is pretty compelling, because I know a lot of authors, even nonfiction, they haven't heard even of Product Hunt, or they've heard of it, but they haven't thought about using it for their book. And in your case, it's been extremely powerful. And there are other websites like Product Hunt out there with the same like upvote system that you can leverage to gain readers and to be discovered, basically. So what would be your tips for an author who's going to launch a book in a month or something like that to go on the top of Product Hunt or Hacker News or a Reddit subreddit?
Well, if it is startup related, I would say one of the things I had going on for me is that I gave the book away for free for the first few days. Right. And frankly, I don't know if these influencers would have tweeted about it if, it's like, hey, here's this guy I don't really know all that well, and he's trying to sell his book. Here's a link to buy his book. Like, I don't know if they would have done that. But the fact was, I genuinely wanted to make sure that this book could, well, the reason I gave away was 2 reasons. One, I wanted to make sure that friends of mine, like real friends of mine, could get it for free. Like, they had a way to get it for free. I didn't want, the point of me writing this book was not to make money from my friends, right? So I wanted to have a way that I could do that. But then 2, I did hope that I could build some momentum, build some buzz in those first few days when it's free. And I was hoping that there might be some residual effect, so that when I do end up putting a price tag on the book, like that might help me spread the word a little bit. And I think it did do those 2 things. So if I was recommending to somebody else, like, hey, how do you get your book to the top of Product Hunt? I would encourage them, hey, consider making the book free just for a couple of days, because number 1, if it goes on Product Hunt that first day, like there's some fear of missing out, right? Like, oh, once this goes paid, like I won't be able to get this book for free anymore. That's one thing. Also, like, you have to know your audience. My audience, startup entrepreneurs that are looking for money. Well, just by the virtue of they're looking for money, they don't have a ton of money to buy books. And they do. I mean, I was one of those entrepreneurs, right? So like one of the things I did spend money on was educational things, like things to help me teach myself to go along the process. But even still, when you could pick something like that up for free, of course, you're going to be motivated to do that. So so that's a couple of things. And then I would say share what you're working on as early as possible with other people, but also influencers. And really, again, I did have a loose connection to Brad Feld, but I wouldn't say that, he was like a good dear friend, or, we knew each other so well, but at least he probably was familiar with my name, because for my previous startup, I would share things with him and ask for feedback, and he'd give me feedback. So I figured, hey, until he tells me to stop asking him for feedback, or until he stops responding, I would continue to do that. So things like when our demo was ready, I would share it with him and get some feedback, and he'd give it to me. So that was the extent that I knew Brad. But that doesn't mean that, look, like Steve Case, I didn't know at all. And I still reached out to him and asked if he could spread the word. I just knew that he specifically is interested in promoting the Rust Belt as a place that people could start companies. And the Rust Belt is, this area in the United States where it's Cleveland, Detroit, Pittsburgh, like this whole area where there used to be heavy manufacturing. Well, now some startups are actually getting going in those places. And Steve Case has been one of the champions for places like that to start companies. And I knew that. So I was trying to sort of appeal, tug on his heartstrings a little bit. And it worked. And it also helped that one of the people I profiled in the book was his partner, Tig Savage in Revolution Ventures. So that's the other thing is, I would say, if you've written pieces of your book, and again, for mine, it worked well, but like I profiled 14 different entrepreneurs and investors who have either raised capital or have invested in companies that have raised capital. So, use that as a way that you might be able to have an in with some of these people. Even if you don't profile people in your book, maybe you write about maybe you mention a certain company, or maybe you mention a certain topic. If that's really important to one of these influencers, that would be a good thing to point out in your initial outreach to them. It might give them a little bit more motivation to help you out.
No, it's definitely important. I think influencers have to look at them and take a personal approach for each of them. Reach out to as many as possible, but like with a personal strategy for every one of them, because else they're not going to answer right.
Absolutely. And that's the thing too, is for me, these were personal outreach. This wasn't a situation where I just had 100 people on a list and I was just like emailing myself and BCCing everybody. And it was a personal note I sent to every single one of them. And there are people also on my list that I ended up not reaching out to, because as I was about to reach out to them, I thought, this, based on now what I'm learning about them, I don't know if this is the right connection or not. I don't know, like from their perspective, I don't know if it would make sense for them to even help me out and send this note to their audience. So yeah, you have to treat it as a personal outreach. Like in my mind, I don't even, like, they are influencers, but I'm like thinking about them as people first and foremost. And hey, are these people that I could build a relationship with ultimately? Like, you have to think of it that way. Otherwise, if you just think of it as like just influencers, it sort of feels very transactional. It feels, I don't know, something about it doesn't feel right. So even though that is what they are, like, just realize like you're sending a note to a real person and you have to personally appeal to them.
Of course. How did you get the Amazon algorithms to work for you to get to that first place? You think it's thanks to the reviews or the downloads in the first day?
Well, I will say, I don't know is the answer, but there were two things that I really was trying to get going. And it was exactly what you're talking about: positive reviews, or just reviews in general. Like, I was just hoping anybody would be able to leave a review, and downloads. And what I will say is the downloads absolutely helped in getting on the top lists for free books. But I was also really curious, like, once it goes from free to paid, like, that's a whole new list that Amazon has, right? So you're not going to get in the top books on Amazon that are paid if your book if it only did well free. And so that was I ended up getting into the top. I think it made it to like number 50 overall free books on Amazon. So not even just for my category, just like overall, which was really cool. But then once it turned paid, I had to kind of start from scratch. And the day that it ended up hitting number 1, then it absolutely was the most number of downloads I had total. So I think I think recency really helps. I mean, I think the good news is when you have the spikes where like, you know, you have 100 purchases in a day, and when you are normally doing 25 or 30 or something like that, that absolutely helps. So I know it's directly tied to pure downloads. I don't know if reviews is actually tied to the rankings or not, but just for me, I just think of like if I'm a reader, if I go and look at a book, like I'm interested in buying a book on raising startup capital, right? I go on and I see a book that has 0 reviews, one that has 10 reviews, but it's 50-50, like it kind of averages 2.5 stars, or one that has, you know, I have 32 reviews. It's not hundreds, but it's 32 reviews, and it's 31 5-star and 1 4-star. Like that, it's pretty good. So I don't know if it affects the algorithm or not. All I know is like as a reader, I'd want to know that this has been vetted out by other people. And so that's really what I was shooting for.
All right. And so you mentioned at the beginning that like this was the launch, it was amazing. And now the book obviously can't stay up there unless you're a big personality. So what are you going to do to like keep the momentum going or revive it? Is it going to be PR or tours or stuff like that?
Yeah, it's a great question because, you know, I'm in that mode right now, and I'm really trying to, you know, now start to think about what are things that I could do differently. You know, I've been grateful to be asked to go on all sorts of podcasts, so that's been really cool. I don't know if that will move the dial or not, but it's been fun, and I'll continue to do that because I love doing it. I don't know about I think the book tour thing would be interesting for me. It would be less like a traditional book tour if I were to do that. And it would be more like maybe a series of meetups. Like I could definitely see planning a series of meetups on raising seed capital, and just kind of like, it would be very organic though. Like what I don't envision is having like Borders or Borders doesn't even exist, Barnes and Noble, or, you know, a bookstore come and bring me in. My book's not even available in a traditional bookstore right now. It's really only available on Amazon. So, but I've thought of, you know, startup events would be one thing. So I'm speaking at the Tech Pint Startup Summit in Cleveland, Ohio. I'd love to do other events like that where I could talk about the topic of raising seed capital. That might be one of those, things. In terms of other ways, like now that I'm at this point, you know, I have been asked to write for other publications. So startups.co is one of those publications that's asked me to write, and I believe in what they're doing. So that's exciting. I'm glad to do that. But you know, I'm trying to think about this in different ways too. Like, what can I do that's like completely different? I don't know yet. Like that's sort of where I'm at, what I'm trying to figure out. I think I'm at the phase now where the launch is over, and like the momentum from the launch, like if I just did nothing from here on out, I think the book would probably fall and it would just be steady. Like, you know, it would sell some copies a day, but it would just be steady. So now I need to kick that up. And I'll tell you what I'm going to do is try a bunch of different things. And what I find works well, I'll link back up with you and I'll share those things. But since I'm at that phase now, it's hard for me to really even know what will work.
No, of course, I know, and I look forward to you linking back up with us. But I know also a lot of authors are in your exact same position, so it's interesting to see how you think about it and how you like want to try things differently and more. I love the meetups idea personally, because blog tours are, well, it's kind of easy. Either you do it physically or you do it digitally, but meetups, it's a good middle point.
Well, and it allows you to actually, like, if I were to go to a certain city, I don't want to be on the stage and sitting in a room full of people just like looking at me as I tell them stuff. I want to talk to them. Like, I'd rather sit in a circle with everybody and just have an open discussion, open dialogue. For me as an author too, that just helps me understand who it is that I'm writing for way better than if I'm on stage doing all the talking.
No, of course, that makes sense. Well, As we agreed, we'll certainly do another interview like this
Yeah.
once these things have worked out for you. Congratulations on your first book.
Thank you.
Congratulations on the launch and on everything it's brought to you so far. Our last interview was with Lucas Carlson, who you may know and who has published a bunch of books, and he's found out that his nonfiction books actually have paid off more in terms of speaking opportunities and other optionalities than in sales, and I'm confident the same thing will happen for you.
That's awesome. I appreciate it. Yeah, Lucas, actually, we're supposed to link up. He's bringing me on his podcast, so I'll have to ask him what's worked really well for him, so that I can learn about it as well. But no, this has been great. And the other thing I'll mention is just if any authors, if they wanted to ask me questions, they're definitely welcome to, and I'd love to talk to them. I'm on Twitter at @Belsito, but also anybody could just email me directly. It's mikebelsito@gmail.com. And then the book, people could just search for it on Amazon, or if you go to seedfundingbook.com, that'll take you right to the book page as well.
Fantastic. And we will provide, as usual, a short transcript of the best excerpt of this interview on our blog, and we'll link to the book. We'll put your email address, and there'll be space in the comments for questions for you.
Awesome. That's great.
Fantastic. Well, have a fantastic day, and
Thank you.
Let's link back.
All right. Sounds great. Thanks so much for having me on.
Thanks.